For 1,000 years, the royal family had one rule: never complain, never explain. Whatever was said about them, however damaging it got, however unfair it seemed from the inside, they stayed silent. The mystery, the dignity, the untouchable image, all of it depended on that silence. It was the whole thing. It was not just a PR strategy. It was the foundational operating principle of one of the longest surviving institutions on Earth.
For the time being, it's impossible for me to take my family back to the UK safely.
And then reportedly, in late 2025, that rule got thrown out completely. What replaced it was something nobody saw coming. Because William did not just break the silence in some gentle, diplomatic way. A carefully worded statement, a spokesperson's press release, the usual machinery running at reduced speed. According to reports circulating across royal commentary, he came out swinging. And the palace has not looked anything like this before.
We don't go back to some of the practices in the past that, Harry and I had to grow up in. I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda.
Tonight we are going through all of it, where it reportedly started, what the internal shift allegedly looked like, what William reportedly said publicly, what Catherine is said to have been doing behind the scenes, and what all of it means for the institution going forward. Because if even a significant portion of what is being reported is accurate, the monarchy we are watching right now is fundamentally different from the one that existed just a few years ago. Let's start at the beginning, with the moment that reportedly changed everything. Sometime between 2021 and 2023, according to reports, a collection of private messages allegedly surfaces and reaches the right hands inside the institution. And the moment that happens, according to people claiming knowledge of the situation, everything inside the palace changes. Not gradually, not through a quiet internal conversation about how to manage the situation more carefully. Everything. The kind of shift, according to these accounts, that makes people inside that institution stop what they are doing and look at each other differently. These were not, according to the reporting, random fragments of gossip circulating informally. They were allegedly a detailed picture of what was going on behind the scenes during one of the most turbulent periods the family had experienced in decades. And what was reportedly found inside those messages was not easy reading for the people who saw them.
Squashes this idea that somehow my wife was the one that destroyed the relationship between these two brothers.
King Charles, according to what was allegedly written, was painted as emotionally absent at a time when Meghan has said she needed support the most. That alone, according to reports, was significant enough to change the internal conversation. But it was reportedly one specific line that changed the entire temperature inside the palace and reportedly altered the way senior royals understood everything that had been happening up to that point. Meghan allegedly wrote that if Charles would not protect her, the narrative will safeguard me. Now, there are two ways to read that sentence, and both deserve to be stated fairly. One reading is that it is a person who felt genuinely cornered, isolated, unsupported, trying to figure out how to survive an impossible situation in an institution that was not helping her. That is a legitimate reading and it deserves acknowledgement. The other reading, reportedly the one that landed inside the palace, is that it was a roadmap. A deliberate, considered decision to take personal moments, private conversations, and real pain, and deploy them strategically to shape how the public understood the royal family. Not just to share her experience, but to actively direct the public narrative against the institution. That distinction, from she is sharing her experience to this was a planned operation, is reportedly what changed everything inside the palace. Because once you see something through that second lens, according to these accounts, it cannot be unseen. Every interview, every carefully timed story that appeared in the press, every public appearance, suddenly, it all looked different.
I was really ashamed to say it at the time and ashamed to have to admit it to Harry, especially because I know how much loss he's suffered.
The palace reportedly stopped treating this as a family matter requiring patience and sensitivity. They started treating it as something that needed a real, strategic response, not a diplomatic "we wish them well." Something with actual weight behind it. If Palace Insider is giving you the full picture that other channels skip, go ahead and hit the like button. It genuinely helps us reach more people. While all of this was reportedly landing inside the palace, something else was allegedly being set in motion. King Charles, who at this point was managing his own serious health situation, reportedly made a decision that nobody outside the inner circle saw coming. Instead of handling the Sussex situation through the usual slow machinery of the monarchy, committees, carefully worded statements, diplomatic distance, he allegedly handed responsibility for it entirely to William. Insiders reportedly refer to this internal arrangement as Memo 2485, or in some accounts as the Fall Mandate. What it allegedly did was straightforward. Give William full responsibility for anything related to Harry and Meghan going forward. One voice, one approach, no more conflicting signals coming from opposite ends of the palace. Think about what that means historically. Disputes at this level of a royal family have always been steered by the sovereign. The monarch decides what gets addressed, what gets ignored, what gets managed quietly, and what gets allowed to fade. That is how it has worked across centuries. The authority to navigate the family's internal problems sits with the person at the top of the institution. For Charles to step back and hand that responsibility directly to William, that is not a procedural adjustment. That is a deliberate, unmistakable signal that the old approach was no longer adequate for the situation. And it made sense, according to these accounts, given the specific circumstances Charles was navigating. He was managing a serious health situation while simultaneously trying to keep his public duties going, representing the institution at state visits, diplomatic events, public engagements, the continuous visible work of being the sovereign. Adding active day-to-day management of one of the most complex family situations the monarchy had seen in decades on top of all of that was reportedly more than one person should be expected to handle simultaneously.
King Charles coming down hard on Prince William, no Chucky boy, and assassination. Yes, you heard me correctly.
William had the energy, the focus, and reportedly, the personal motivation. He was not going to tiptoe. Charles reportedly knew exactly what that meant and made the decision anyway. What the alleged arrangement also meant practically was that there would now be one unified voice coming from the palace on anything Sussex related. No more situations where contradictory signals came out from different ends of the building on the same day. No more sense that nobody inside was actually coordinating. The era of mixed messaging was reportedly declared over, and the people around William reportedly understood immediately that the approach going forward was going to look very different from anything they had seen before. Subscribe to Palace Insider and drop a comment below. What do you think is the most significant moment in this whole story? Here is something that reportedly got buried under everything else happening at the same time. While the world was focused on Catherine's health, genuinely concerned about where she was and how she was recovering, she was allegedly doing something nobody on the outside expected. She was working. Not publicly, not in front of cameras. Behind the scenes, according to reports, she was allegedly the one shaping the entire direction the palace was going to take. And when you think about it, it makes sense. Catherine had spent years understanding what the monarchy stood for and what it needed to survive. She knew that the royal family's entire value to the public rested on one thing: showing up, putting the institution above yourself, and being seen to do it. Anything that pulled focus from that was a threat. So reportedly, while still recovering, she was already thinking several steps ahead. What does the monarchy need to look like right now? What story does the public need to see? And what needs to be addressed before it does real damage? The answers she allegedly came up with reportedly became the foundation for everything William would eventually do publicly. New internal protocols were reportedly introduced without any fanfare. Strict guidelines about messaging, about what gets responded to and what gets ignored, about drawing a clear line between the working royals and what was coming out of California. The era of absorbing hits without responding was allegedly declared finished. What makes Catherine's reported role so interesting is how invisible it apparently was. No announcements, no headlines. It was all happening in the background, and which, in a strange way, may have made it more effective. By the time William's approach started showing up publicly, it was reportedly already fully formed. Her fingerprints on it, even if her name was nowhere near the headlines. Before any of this became public, William reportedly made one last attempt to handle things privately. In October 2025, according to reports, he called Harry. This was not a casual conversation. William allegedly had one specific request. He wanted Harry to correct the record about how Catherine had been portrayed. Not an apology, not a reconciliation, just an accurate account of what had actually happened. Harry's response, according to these reports, stopped the conversation cold. He allegedly told William that walking back the narrative at this point would cost him everything he had built in his new life. Think about that for a moment. The ask was to be accurate about what happened with his sister-in-law. The reported answer was essentially that he could not afford to. For William, according to these accounts, that was the moment he stopped seeing this as something that could be resolved between brothers. Harry was not confused or trapped. He was choosing, and what he was choosing, in William's reported view, was his public image over his own family. Days after that call reportedly went nowhere, William allegedly did something that caught even people watching this closely off guard. He walked into the picture gallery at Kensington Palace, stood in front of cameras himself. No spokesperson, no carefully filtered statement passed through layers of PR, no diplomatic language designed to say nothing while appearing to say something, and spoke directly, in plain language, the royal family almost never uses publicly. He allegedly addressed claims about Catherine head-on, said flat out that nobody in the family had treated Meghan the way that had been suggested, and pointed to what he described as a deliberate effort to damage Catherine's reputation through paid media placements and systematically boosted content. He described one side of this situation as a family that gets up every day and does the work, visits, projects, causes, showing up without asking for anything back, doing the job without making the job the story, and then, without needing to name anything explicitly, he reportedly drew a contrast with what he was calling the other approach. He did not need to say much more than that. Everyone watching knew exactly what he was referring to. The reaction, reportedly both in the room and around the world, was that nobody had seen a royal do this before. Not this directly, not this openly, not with this specific willingness to name patterns and call out coordination. This was not the monarchy speaking in its careful, distant register. This was the future king looking into a camera and deciding that the rule which had governed the institution for a century was no longer fit for purpose. Whatever came next, the palace was not going to be the quiet party in the room anymore. What most observers did not fully appreciate while all of this was playing out publicly is that a significant amount of the groundwork had reportedly been laid long before William ever stood in that gallery. Behind closed doors, according to reports, a group of specialists had been assembled without any public announcement. People whose entire job was to sit down and map out in detail what was happening with the Sussex media operation. Connections between stories, outlets being used, patterns of coverage, timing of releases, methods of amplification. All of it allegedly documented and assembled into a picture. And what that picture allegedly showed was not random. According to these accounts, what they were seeing looked coordinated. Stories placed in specific outlets at specific times. Content amplified in ways designed to push it in front of exactly the right audiences at exactly the right moments. The palace reportedly came to see this not as a couple sharing their experience with the world, but as a full media operation running with a clear goal, shaping how the public understood the royal family, particularly Catherine. By the time William made his appearance at Kensington Palace, he was reportedly already fully across everything that group had assembled. The response from the other side, according to reports, came within 72 hours of William's Kensington Palace appearance. Stories appeared in major American outlets about how Meghan had felt pushed aside and emotionally abandoned by the family. The framing was personal and sympathetic, clearly designed to pull the conversation back toward her experience and away from the specific accusations William had raised. For anyone watching the pattern over time, it was familiar. But this time, allegedly, the palace did not sit on it. They reportedly pushed back publicly, calling out what they described as commercially packaged content. Content produced with a clear commercial goal, being presented to readers as genuine personal reporting. That was a genuinely new move, not something the palace would have done 12 months earlier. The decision to name the pattern rather than simply wait for the coverage to cycle out marked a specific change in approach. The second phase of the response from the other side was, according to these accounts, more revealing than the first. The narrative coming out of California reportedly shifted. It was no longer primarily about what happened inside the royal family. It became about reinvention, health projects, a children's book, documentary content about generational cycles and breaking patterns. A pivot from discontented former royal to forward-thinking, independent figure. On the surface, a smart move. But the palace had reportedly already thought about what came after that pivot. Because a significant part of what made the reinvention narrative compelling to audiences was the royal tension underneath it. The sense of someone breaking free from something ancient and powerful. Pull that royal connection away, make the door visibly closing, and the story starts losing some of what made it compelling in the first place. The palace was reportedly not just responding to the current move, they were thinking about what came 3 moves after it. Then came what reports describe as the move that caught even close observers off guard. A push to remove Harry and Meghan's remaining royal standing altogether. Not a temporary suspension, not a period of reduced duties, According to reports, a clean and complete severance, access to royal properties, any remaining official recognition, all of it, was allegedly placed on the table. The kind of decision that, once made, does not get reversed. And the palace's reported approach to handling it was characteristically quiet. No drama. No public announcement of what was being considered. Just a door, allegedly, in the process of being closed. Around the same time, according to these accounts, William reportedly began speaking about Archie and Lilibet. The tone allegedly shifted from the composed, strategic voice at Kensington Palace to something more personal and less rehearsed. He said, according to these reports, that they deserved stability, a proper childhood away from the noise and the constant back and forth playing out in the press. The palace was quick to clarify that this was not a threat of any kind. But the message, according to observers watching closely, was clear. The institution was paying attention to how the younger generation was being pulled into the story, and it was not comfortable with what it saw. By positioning themselves this way, as the side genuinely and publicly concerned about the children's well-being, the palace reportedly made it publicly uncomfortable for the media activity to continue at its existing pace without raising questions about what it was costing the children specifically. And then William reportedly drew a comparison that landed like a thunderclap in the room and in the coverage that followed. He brought up Prince Andrew, the most publicly disgraced member of the modern royal family, a man who lost everything. Official patronages, public duties, his standing within the institution, his ability to appear at major royal events, a man the family now keeps at a very deliberate distance. By drawing that comparison, William was not making a personal attack or a threat. He was reportedly making a structural and historical point about how the institution actually works. Nobody in this family, he was allegedly saying, sits above the same set of expectations and consequences. It does not matter who you are, what your title is, or what your connection to the crown looks like on paper. The rules apply to everyone. The consequences for not meeting them are real. They happened to someone very close to the institution before, and the institution carried out those consequences without sentiment. It was a warning, reportedly, wrapped in a historical example, and everyone in the room and everyone watching knew exactly what the example was pointing toward. Through all of it, Catherine had not said a word publicly. While the story played out loudly and visibly on one side, she was reportedly doing something that made a more lasting statement than any speech could have. Just days after the most intense stretch of this whole situation, she reportedly showed up at a pediatric oncology center. Plain dress, small anchor brooch, a small detail people noticed. No press conference, no carefully timed statement about everything that had been happening around her. She just showed up and did the work. The contrast with what was coming out of California at the same time, documentary announcements, media appearances, brand launches, the constant churn of public content, was reportedly impossible to ignore in the circles paying close attention. One side making noise, the other side showing up quietly at a children's cancer ward. No statement required. One line allegedly attributed to Catherine during this period reportedly stopped senior officials in their tracks. She is said to have told people around her, "I forgive her, but I will not accept her suffering as my duty." Sit with that sentence, because it is doing several things at once. There is genuine grace in it. There is no coldness, no bitterness, nothing punitive. But there is also a very clear line, one that says this will not be carried indefinitely, and will not be allowed to define what the institution is building. That balance, reportedly, became the underlying philosophy behind everything the palace did during this period. Personal empathy on one side, absolute clarity about the institution's direction on the other, and the ability to hold both simultaneously without one collapsing the other. Step back and look at all of it together. What you are reportedly seeing, if these accounts hold, is the end of one era and the beginning of something genuinely different. For a long time, the monarchy's survival strategy was built on distance and mystery. Stay above it all. Do not engage with specific accusations. Let the institution speak for itself through ceremony, continuity, and tradition. Trust that the public would eventually see through the noise. That strategy worked for a very long time, across some genuinely difficult periods. But in a world where a story can travel from a private message to a global headline in hours, where social media amplification can make a contested narrative feel like established fact before any institutional response is possible, that strategy had reportedly started to show its age in ways that the people inside the palace could no longer ignore. The silence that once conveyed dignity was starting to look, in some quarters, like an inability to respond. What William and Catherine are said to have built in its place is something more direct, more proactive, willing to name specific patterns out loud that the palace would have never publicly acknowledged before. Willing to draw comparisons, call out coordination, and stand in front of cameras and speak plainly about what they believe is happening. That is a real gamble. Because the mystery that the old approach protected was not just a communications advantage, it was part of the institution's structural value. The moment you start explaining yourself, you have invited the public into a conversation that is very difficult to close again. You have traded some of the untouchable quality for the ability to respond directly. Whether that trade is worth it in the long run is genuinely something nobody knows yet. There is no blueprint for this version of the monarchy, no historical precedent for a future king standing in a gallery and describing media coordination patterns in plain language. The soft monarchy, patient, quiet, endlessly absorbing, never explaining, is reportedly over. What has taken its place, according to these accounts, is something leaner, sharper, and considerably less forgiving. Whether that turns out to be exactly what the institution needed for this moment, or the beginning of something it cannot fully control once started, is the story that is still being written. But if this stretch of 2025 is anything to go by, what comes next is going to look nothing like what came before it. Do you think William and Catherine have made the right call by breaking the tradition of silence? Or is there something important the old approach understood that the new one risks losing permanently? Drop your take in the comments, subscribe to Palace Insider so you do not miss what comes next, and a like genuinely helps us reach more people who want the real picture. See you in the next one. What is clear, if these accounts are even partially accurate, is that William and Catherine have made a choice, a deliberate, irreversible choice, about what kind of institution they intend to lead. The era of silence as dignity is over. Whether what replaces it turns out to be exactly what the monarchy needed, or a gamble that changes the institution in ways that cannot be undone, is the question that the next decade will answer. The story is still being written, but the people writing it from Kensington Palace have reportedly already decided what chapter they are in.